Welcome back to the Trailblazer Pod. I'm your host, Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are trailblazers. How do we make and keep friends as adults? This week's trailblazer, Nina Badzin, who's the host of the podcast Dear Nina, Conversations About Friendship, joins me to unpack the nuances of adult connection, Jewish identity, creative pivots, and the courage it takes to chart your own path. Let's dive in. Nina, welcome to the Trailblazer Pod. It's so good to have you and to finally meet you. How are you today?
I'm so happy to meet you too, and I love talking to someone so much younger than I am. It's actually really refreshing.
So I like to start almost every single one of my episodes with understanding who my guests were as a little kid. Can you share with us where you grew up and what little Nina was like?
Oh, I love thinking of little Nina. So I grew up in Highland Park, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago, which many of your Jewish listeners probably know someone. Everyone knows someone from Highland Park. Oh, I went to college with someone from Highland Park, always. I really loved growing up there. I always think of myself as a suburban girl, but what's nice is when you grow up with a big city nearby, your parents were, well, my dad especially was really big Cubs fan, Bulls fan. So I would get to go to those experiences. And I grew up in Chicago in the 90s where it was like the heyday of the Bulls. So I saw Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Funny thing is, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm not even a sports fan at all. Like if my husband or my kids hear this, they like roll their eyes. But we also got to see lots of theater and shows and stuff, which my parents would take us to. So you got the benefits of the city, but the ease of living in the suburbs. And I would say that plays into today because I live in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and I like the suburbs, I guess. But growing up, I went to all Highland Park public schools from kindergarten through high school. My mom just sold the house that I grew up in, that my father grew up in. My grandparents were among the earlier Jews to be in Highland Park. Now it's such a Jewish part of Chicago, but it wasn't always. So my grandparents built that house in 1950, and my dad grew up in it. Eventually, they bought it from my grandparents. I grew up in it. So it was very emotional when
That's special.
Yeah. My dad died 3 years ago. My mom stayed in there a year or two, but then she was ready to downsize. I have very warm feelings about my upbringing. I liked going to school there, and I went to college in the Midwest in St. Louis at WashU, and I live in Minnesota, so I'm very Midwestern, actually.
I love it. I can see in like your eyes how passionate you are about talking about your childhood, and it's so beautiful to see. You did mention like the theater and the shows, and it leads into my next question. Because I know what you do, and we'll get into that, I can assume you're a very creative person. And I'm curious, did your parents or family or in your environment encourage creativity or like expressiveness as a kid?
I think they did. They're really into art, and I'm not a visual artist at all, but my parents were art collectors. My house I grew up in was full of art. I mean, there isn't a table corner, there isn't a area of wall that doesn't have some sort of sculpture art. My mom's really also into collecting wearable art. So she doesn't just wear a pair of earrings. She wears like a statement pair of earrings. She doesn't just have a necklace. She has a necklace. Cool. Yes. Like you're going to ask her about that necklace. Like everything's a conversation piece. So she's very, very creative herself. What I always loved growing up was writing. I mean, so that's really my creativity. And it was more creative writing back in the day. It started out with fiction, but I remember a seventh grade teacher telling me I was a good writer. And I don't know if I then became a good writer because she said that. I think I won some sort of writing contest back then. It's like you then...
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Kind of like you feed into the thing you're already getting accolades on. But I love writing. I still do. That's why the idea of like AI makes me so depressed, actually. But whatever. That's a whole different topic.
So I like that you said you weren't like a visual creative person. It's interesting because I actually went to college for creative writing too. That was like my stepping stone into college. And I never thought of myself as a creative person, even though I was like writing poetry. I just didn't connect. Like I wasn't painting. Well, I was painting a little bit like weird paintings. It wasn't like people wouldn't say I'm an artist, right? And I associated creative people with art and maybe music. And it took me a long time, like actually recently, to tap into like, okay, I actually am creative, like tap into that part and try to like shed the layers and like feel a little bit more. But I just find it fascinating that you were saying that because I also had like this association with the creative side of me. And I feel like, I don't know, is it a pattern with people who write? Is it like a different kind of creativity?
Maybe. And, I did not major in writing. I majored in political science and Spanish. And it took me a long time to really take the writing part seriously because I just felt like that was something you do for fun. I didn't take it that seriously. And it took a long time and a circuitous path to get back to writing. But the visual part, like, I don't know if you have this, but even for the podcast, like I find making the graphics look really stressful. Like it's just not, thank God for Canva and programs that help.
I love Canva.
Right? Because I so admire people who even graphic on the computer can make something that looks really appealing. I'm like, oh, that must be nice.
Before we get into coming back to writing as a career, I'm just curious what your childhood looked like in terms of like Judaism. How did it play a role growing up?
It's such a great question, the way you worded it. How did it play a role?
Oh.
It definitely played a role because of who I became later. But I grew up Reform. We went to a very architecturally beautiful synagogue called North Shore Congregation Israel in Glencoe, Illinois, right on Lake Michigan. I mean, right on the lake. I mean, it was quite gorgeous. I don't remember his name. He was a famous Japanese architect. Super tall ceilings. It was pretty typical Reform upbringing, I would say, in that part of the country. I don't know what it was like in the East Coast or the West Coast, but I would say like for the Chicago suburbs, pretty typical, meaning it was definitely important to my parents. We did a couple of the holidays. Like we always did Passover. We always did a little bit of Hanukkah, though I feel like by day like 4, they were kind of like done with it in terms of lighting the candles. Like they were really just done. And we would do like one night of Passover, but we didn't really keep it the whole week. There was no cleaning out of the house, anything like that. And the high holidays, we would go to the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The whole, what I call, and this is going to have a negative connotation, and I basically mean it that way, the whole bar mitzvah factory of, we had maybe 4 or 5 a weekend. So if you were a 7th grader in Highland Park, you had bar and bat mitzvahs, and this is going to tell you a lot. You had a party Friday night, which I didn't know was strange until I got to college. I didn't realize like that was kind of weird. And I'm sorry, I do think it is. Then there would be the Saturday morning service for like a different family. So maybe the person who had the Friday night party might have done it in Israel or something, and then they came back, had a party. Okay, so that was just the party. Saturday morning service for somebody. Oftentimes you might have somebody else's party Saturday night, but you also might have that person's party right after the service. So a daytime party.
Wow.
DJ, the whole thing. So yeah, you probably can't relate to that because I
cannot relate to that at all.
I know a little bit about your background too.
Yeah. Bar mitzvahs were very traditional, right? Beautiful experience, but also like I didn't go to a co-ed school, so I experienced maybe my brothers and a first cousin potentially, and then also on the other side, the girls didn't have bat mitzvahs. So because we didn't do that growing up. And I always find it fascinating because I speak to a couple of women on the podcast that grew up with almost like no Judaism didn't play a role at all in their life. And so they didn't either have bat mitzvahs. And I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
I was going to tell you, there's like, gosh, I have a lot to say about a lot of that. But finishing the weekend, then we would have a Sunday party for somebody. So the families would, I don't know who coordinated it, if it was someone at the school or some industrious, and helpful parent would emerge each year to be like, okay, here's when everyone's is. I don't know how that happened, but that was like 7th grade. That was huge. And then it kind of sort of ends after that. We didn't do much that I knew. I didn't know anyone who did youth groups. Like there wasn't really, I did not personally have friends who did things like BBYO or USY. Right. It just like wasn't a thing. Yeah. And maybe because most of our friends were Jewish. It's a very heavily Jewish area. I did stay at the synagogue all the way through confirmation, which you do when you're in the Reform movement until you're around 15. So that was about 13 years of Hebrew school confirmation. Yeah. And I, on my own, on the side, always had a little bit of extra curiosity. So like my parents would take us to go see Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. I would come home and say, can I read the whole story? And we had, it's not like my parents didn't have, I probably got it for my bat mitzvah, like the whole, printed version of the Torah. And so my mom also was very intellectually interested. She bought a whole set of books on the Kabbalah from someone who was selling them door to door, and she read them all. My mom's very smart. She was very curious. She grew up in the East Coast and maybe had a little more exposure, but wasn't that interested growing up, whereas my dad grew up in Highland Park with a Christmas tree, and they belonged to a synagogue. Both his parents were Jewish, but like they were assimilated, like really assimilated. When my mom married my dad, she was like, absolutely not. She was like East Coast Jew. We are not having a Christmas tree. None of that. But anyway, I had a connection that is a little bit inexplicable.
Yeah.
More than anyone in my family. So I'd want to read the chapter in Genesis.
Wow.
And I read it and I was interested. I was the only one who had a bat mitzvah in my family for various reasons. My parents had an adult b'nai mitzvah much, much later when I was an adult and had kids already. I would like to think I helped bring some of the Judaism back. Although in my family, like I've had various people kind of feel a little bit like I can tell they roll their eyes when I come along. They're like, oh, here comes Nina, super Jew, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I don't know if you want me to get into, clearly I'm implying that I have chosen a different path for myself than how I grew up, which is.
Yeah. So I do absolutely want to get into that. I want to talk about your career and then we'll tie it back to where you're at with Judaism.
Great.
I just love that you basically answered my next question where it was like, some people go through life, okay, I'm Jewish, and there's no thought process about it. Nothing wrong with that. It's just, either part of their life or not. And then some people they physically feel it and think about it and it's a part of their like intellect and they always want to know more even if they're not observant. And so I was curious which one you were, but you answered my question all by yourself.
I really was like that. Like I remember being in AP art history and I only remember it because my daughter who's in high school is taking that class now. Like otherwise it wouldn't be so present in my mind. Yeah. But I remember going through all the different parts of history and I always remember thinking like, I wonder what the Jews were doing during that time. Like I don't know why I was like that. It
was just in you.
It was in me. We'd go on a trip somewhere and learn something about history and I'd be like, but where were the Jews?
I think it's really special and I feel like all of us have these little things in ourselves that make us unique and that was your thing and I think it's we're going to talk about where that brought you today and I think it's beautiful. So let's talk about that. So you did mention you were told you're a good writer, but then in college you didn't study writing. You studied political science
and Spanish.
Spanish. What was your like dream career or like trajectory you wanted to take?
I wanted to go to law school. And I think I wanted to go to law school because I have a kind of an organized brain and I just thought I would be good at that kind of thing. And I was good at school. So I think in a place where I like didn't quite know what I wanted to do with myself, the idea of 3 more years of school was like, okay, I know how to do that. I can study and make my whole life about going to the library. Like that's something I'm good at. I'm not saying I was dying to be a lawyer, but my parents like to remind me that I used to say I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, which now seems so ridiculous. I couldn't think of a less appealing thing to do. But I think I was just a very directed person. And I was like, okay, well, if you go to law school, that's the top thing to be eventually. Right. And I would say that, but that kind of embarrasses me now. But not the law part, but the Supreme Court justice part. Well, I'm so far from that. But yeah.
That's life.
Yeah, that's true.
The beauty of life. So how did writing show up on your radar again?
So junior year of college, I went to Santiago, Chile. You're supposed to say Chile, but I always feel like cheesy saying it that way. That is how you say it, though. And that was for my semester abroad. But when you go to South America for a semester abroad because of the different seasons and the way they do the school, you really end up there for 9 months. So you're there for second semester plus the summer because their summer is the school year. It's not. It's
That's
summer.
So cool.
So I was there quite a long time. And we didn't live in dorms in that program, like with other Americans. You lived with a family. And this does touch the Jewish story too. It's all connected.
Cool. I love it.
So I lived with a older Catholic couple. They were probably in their 80s. That's who would like have a room in their house. They were lovely people, right. Carmen and Lucho. And they were super religious Catholics. You had to, in their little church, where there were many in Santiago, many little neighborhood, you might think of like little stiebels, but little churches. You had to go to Carmen and Lucho to get married, meaning they didn't marry you. Obviously, the priest married you, but you had to do your classes, the novios classes, like the newlyweds. You would have to go to several classes with Carmen and Lucho to kind of get your stamp of approval to get married in the church. So my point is they're really religious. And I was the only Jewish person they'd ever really been in such close contact with. And they were really open to me and interested. And they really saw me as their sort of ancestor in a way, like their old cousin. And how disappointing for them that I did not know anything.
Oh, interesting.
That's why, I brought up my upbringing. You can imagine with my 13 years of Hebrew school plus confirmation, where we did like a lot of Holocaust classes and, Jews and humor and Jews and sports and things like that. I show up, they want to understand, what is kosher? Why do Jews keep kosher? Do any Jews still keep kosher? I mean, they never met really anyone.
Wow.
And I felt this responsibility of representation, like, okay, I better have something to tell them. Wow. My parents did come to visit me at one point, and I told them this issue. I'm like, okay, Carmen and Lucho want to know things. I have nothing to tell them. So they asked around a little at home, and they brought me super thick book by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, who has just great conservative rabbi, but conservative back in the day, like that almost looks like modern Orthodox now. And he has wonderful books. One of them was called Jewish Literacy. This thick. I mean, if anyone's watching it, it's like super thick. And there's just a page on everything. A lot of history, but then also a lot of Jewish law stuff. So why do you keep kosher? Okay, so I can read the page. And then I would translate it into Spanish. My Spanish was like decent, but it wasn't, I mean, I was a Spanish major, but mostly until I got to Santiago taking classes in America. Like, how good is your Spanish going to be? But good enough to be able to dictionary and whatever. And you can imagine how much I learned.
Wow.
I learned a lot of things, just basic. It's not like I had deep classes. This is basic information, but I had to translate it from English to Spanish and then explain it to somebody. So it's not like
what a cool experience.
It was really interesting. And Lucho's job, his actual job, was that he made crucifixes out of wood. He was like a wood maker. He was an artist, really. And I mean, I slept under like a huge crucifix. I mean, it was kind of a crazy semester. In that semester, the reason I bring this up is not even the Jewish part, but it is relevant. I also was doing research for my poli-sci major. And it was really heavy. It was about women's roles in the newly formed political parties in Santiago. So Chile was only a democracy for about 10 years then, after a very long period of dictatorship. And so there was like kind of new parties forming, and I was working with a professor back at WashU and doing this research. I was just not that interested in it. I was doing it, and like I said, my Spanish was like decent, but it wasn't. I mean, this was hard work because this was for my poli-sci major, but I had to do the research in Spanish.
Wow.
I just was super unhappy. I was working on something I was not that interested in. I was a junior in college. Like most of my friends were abroad in Israel or London or Spain, Italy, just having a blast, living in dorms with Americans, going to clubs. Like I was like living with Carmen and Lucho. It was having like a weird semester. I came home for my senior year of college with all the research, brought it to the professor and said, here, I'm not writing this thesis. You don't have to write a thesis. You only had to write a thesis to graduate with a certain level of honors.
Yeah.
But I decided by then I don't want to go to law school. I canceled the LSAT. I'm like, well, if I don't want to go to law school and I'm not trying to get into a certain kind of law school, I don't really need to write this thesis. It's good enough to just graduate. I don't need to graduate with some special honors. So I dropped the thesis. I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, but I'd already taken enough classes for my major by then. And so I was able to take classes mostly that I wanted to take. So I signed up for a literature class of books I was like really excited to read. And I took a creative writing nonfiction class, which I had not taken in many, many, many years. And that was senior year. And I really kind of came into my own starting as a writer. I didn't take that as a career quite yet, but that was the first time that I really took writing classes on a serious level. And that teacher also, she was a visiting author. She also was really encouraging. And she was like, you're going to be on the radio one day. It's funny. I ended up more on a podcast, but she's like,
by the way, you have the perfect voice for a radio or podcast.
That's what she said.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
She was like, you have a radio voice. She's like, she liked the writing because it was nonfiction, so it was real stuff. I ended up meeting my now husband then, which I did not plan on. Did not think I'd get married so young. I got married at 23, and he was in business school at WashU, so I kind of stayed in St. Louis an extra year, took some more writing classes, but I ended up going to become an English teacher. So I was an English teacher before. I was a writer for reasons you can imagine, which is, again, I felt like, how do you be a writer? So I 100%. Became a teacher instead.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scary career path because it's not linear at all. And there's so many different ways to do it. It's part of the reason I pivoted as well. But I do have to say that it's so beautiful that you figured that out at, how old were you in junior? Probably like 20, 21? Right?
Yeah. Like I think I turned 21 right before I left, and I'm so glad I didn't go to law school. Think about all the years and money and everything.
Exactly. But do you know how brave that is? Because so many people at that age, they put 3 years into this. They had this whole idea in their head. How do you like let go of that? And like, how do you tell people? I'm sure everyone knew you were going to be a lawyer, right? And it's so vulnerable to say, I changed my mind, or I'm doing something else. And sometimes you can feel like a failure, or why did I waste all my time? Or I have to defend the decisions. And people wait years and years. And I feel like they wouldn't, like, you got the opportunity in senior year to actually take classes in things that you were passionate about. And so many people miss that opportunity. Like, what gave you the courage to do that at such a young age?
You know what? I appreciate that. I don't know if anyone's ever said that to me before, and it is true. Because I'm someone who cared what people think and still do. That's like
Yeah.
one of my, for sure, it's like a weakness I work on. So the fact that I know that about myself, I actually am shocked in hindsight that I did make that decision, because it absolutely mattered to me that I
Yeah,
knew
I
what I
can
was doing and
imagine.
I was going places. And I went to a college where people were going places. Like, people did not go there to putz around. Like, if people
Right.
went there, when we came back for senior year, people had interviews set up for consulting
Wow.
firms, and they were also going to law school and business school. And it was very hard to be like, I don't know what I want to do. And I
Exactly.
really didn't. I ended up taking a job for the year after graduation at Hillel,
Wow.
just because it was a 1 year job. It was like a fellowship thing. Really, I needed something to do while my boyfriend at the time was, again, became my husband, but
No.
was finishing business school. And I learned a lot that year too. I mean, I really learned a lot Jewishly that year, because I had to be at least a step ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
That is where I learned the stuff I didn't learn growing up. I said to my husband, or my boyfriend, Brian, I was like so embarrassed, and I felt like a sense of shame that I didn't know things like the full Kiddush, and I didn't know
Wow.
Birkat with prayer after the meal. And I was like so frustrated. 13 years, like, Hebrew school. How do I not know the full Kiddush? Like, I only know very basic. I didn't have basic Jewish literacy. And he's like, I'll make you a tape. This is back like probably when we still had a Walkman, even though this was the late 90s. This would be 1999. Maybe he did it on a CD, like he maybe burned a CD.
Yeah.
That's probably what it was. And he did the entire Kabbalat Shabbat service for me. He did any basic prayers I wanted to know, like Birkat, and I
That's
learned
so
it
sweet.
probably the way I would have learned had I gone to Jewish camp growing up. I went to camp growing up where everyone was Jewish, a lot like Highland Park, but not a Jewish
Right.
camp. So we didn't do prayers. We didn't do. I mean, we like ate
Yeah.
bacon. And yeah, so he taught it to me. It was like, no, he was very like, okay, fine. So you'll learn it now. What's
That's
the
so
big
cool.
deal?
So cool that you felt this sense of responsibility. Same with when you were studying abroad, like this responsibility as a Jew to kind of represent us and know what we're talking about. And I think just tying it back to now after October 7th, I think a lot of assimilated Jews are starting to feel that responsibility, because when you can't really argue with people who don't agree with you if you don't have the facts, right? And if you don't have the
Yes.
facts, you don't know anything. It's just coming from emotion. You can't debate that at all, right?
Yes,
And so
that's
it's just
right.
interesting to see it now, but you obviously experienced this at such a young age. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, and I had that year to learn a lot Jewishly and like as a job, which was great. I like basically got paid to do it. But then we were moving to Minneapolis, and so I was like, okay, what am I going to do when we move to Minnesota? And I decided at that time to become a teacher. And in Minnesota, you have to have a master's in education, which is not that long of a program. It's actually a really great program. It's about 15 months. So it's like 2
Okay.
semesters plus a summer, and you can get your master's in
Wow.
education. Then you have to student teach. And I wanted to be a high school English teacher. Why do I want to be a high school English teacher? Because I love reading. I love
Yeah.
writing. Again, kind of avoiding becoming a writer by
Right.
being around
Yeah.
writing.
Doing it in different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot. I actually I still teach adults right now, but I realized I like teaching and I like literature and writing, but I don't really want to be in such a, it's not that flexible of a job. People are like, oh, teaching's so flexible,
Right.
especially when you have kids. It's like, not really. You have to be in the building at
Yeah.
7 a.m. You come home with 150 essays
Yeah.
to grade. I would come home with those and be like, oh, why did I assign that? What do I want to read ninth grade or 100?
That doesn't benefit me.
No, it's horrible. Like, why do I want to read
Yeah.
150 ninth grade essays? And I did that for about 3 years. And then I had my first child and stayed home with him. And then I had my second child, and I would cry and cry and say to Brian, I should have been a writer. Why wasn't I a writer? I did all these other
Wow.
things. And he said, very much like learning the full Kiddush, he was like, so do it. So be a writer. Like, no one's stopping you. And I was lucky. I mean, it's real life that it is hard to support yourself as a writer. And I had a husband with a good job. So I don't shy away from that. Like, that is part of the story. It's very easy to say, yes, start writing when you don't have to worry about paying the mortgage. I was home with the kids, and I wrote a novel that will never see the light of day, thank God, but it was called The Friends of Ivy Stein. And it was about 3 adult women who were all dumped by the same woman, Ivy. So the 3 different friends were Ivy's high school friend, her college friend, and her young mom friend, because I was about 29, 30, like your age when I wrote it. And I spent like a full year on it, and I had a full book, and I queried agents, and I got really close with this one agent. And she was like, I really like this story. You know, I was obsessed with the topic of friendship even back then.
Yeah.
You know, you could
Why?
see where this is going. It's a great question. Well, I had had a very painful friendship breakup at the end of high school. And friendship was just very important to my parents. And my parents were always busy with friends. I had been very lucky in my life to have good friends that I had normal teenage issues with here and there. But for the most part, it was like a solid, positive part of my life. But then when I moved to Minneapolis, I really struggled to make friends. I made friends eventually. I have very wonderful friends here, but it was for the first time that I had to really think about it. Right. So I think between like the breakup years before and the having to move to a new city, plus getting married so young, friendship was just an interesting topic for me. I was like done dating. So I had nothing really to say about that. I was done dating quite early. So friendship was where the new and interesting relationships were. So the novel, the agent liked one of the storylines, which was the very Jewish storyline of the three. I had one character who had become like a little more religious. It's like, you know.
I love this. It's so cute.
Probably a little autobiography there. Autofiction, they call that. And in that storyline, a woman, one of Ivy's old friends, her own mother had passed away, and she was learning about the year of mourning. She was going to synagogue to say Kaddish. And also she was taking over her mother's newspaper column, which wasn't only about friendship, but it was about relationships. Her mother had like a relationship column. So I wrote a lot of fake columns for that too.
Wow.
Which was sort of interesting. It was a long time, way before I started the friendship stuff. This is just the beginning of the writing career. And I had another kid, and the agent who was interested said, write the whole book just with this story though. And I did. And then that agent was like, by the time she read it, she just like was kind of over it. I too was kind of over it. I turned some of those chapters into short stories that got published in literary magazines. I would get like nominated for prizes here and there. I kind of was like going the fiction route.
Okay.
But no one reads that stuff. Like, I'm sorry, but people do not read literary magazines. It's like, it's a very insular, and like, honestly, most of those places are like fully anti-Semitic now. Like, I'm glad
Really?
That whole literary world is a nightmare. I'm glad I separated from that.
Wow.
But anti-Semitic is probably, they wouldn't call it that. They would say anti-Zionist, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Is what they would say. But I obviously have my own take on that. I left that world when my very close friend from college had started a blog called Scary Mommy in around 2010. And it was huge. I mean, she had a huge, and I was still in my literary planet. And I was like, ooh, I don't want to blog. That's for like not real writers. I don't do that. I did one guest post for her just for fun. She was like taking guest submissions, and I did it. And within an hour, there were about 100 comments. And I was like, oh, that's
the bug.
Fun. That's a lot more fun than sitting around with some like print journal that no one's ever going to read. I absolutely got the bug.
Yeah.
I absolutely had the bug. I wanted a blog like yesterday and just want one in the future. I wanted one like now. And I did. And I started with blogging, but I never really was able to land on one area. I didn't want it to just be parenting. I didn't want it to just be about writing, although I wrote a lot about writing. And soon after that, I started sending things to other sites and kind of doing more of like a freelance kind of thing. Yeah. I never had a cute name for my site. A lot of bloggers back in those early 2010, 11, 12, 13 had like a cute name to go with whatever the theme was. I never had a theme, so mine was just always ninabadzin.com. Still my website URL. Yeah. Around 2014, after a long time of writing about parenting, my kids started getting a little older. My oldest was around 10. So I had a fourth kid in there.
Oh, wow.
One of my big blog posts that did really well was for a site called Nameberry. I don't know if people know the show Younger. That's really big on Netflix. But
yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Pamela, who wrote Younger, also started the website Nameberry back in the day. I used to be obsessed with baby names. And I wrote an article called Please Let Me Name Your Baby. And it was all about like how much I love helping name babies. So and then I wrote a bunch of pieces for Caveller, like helping people name their babies. People would write in advice. Like, I have my oldest is this, my middle is this. This is what I want the letter to start with. What should I name my kid? And I went through that stage too. I had an advice column for writers on another website called Writer Unboxed about how to use Twitter. Without knowing it, I was like developing the advice voice. Yeah. I had for a little while a parenting column. It was not advice. It was more creative nonfiction, just essays in a magazine called Brainchild. And I loved that. I did that for about a year. But then a friend came over for a walk, saw my oldest, and was like, Sam, I loved your mom's piece about your piano recital. I'd written about his piano recital where he started over about 10 times. The article is really about how parents get so worked up about their kids having to struggle. He was like, fine. he just kept starting over. I, of course, was sweating buckets, and it was all about like how I had to basically sit in my hands to not go up there and
Like
put my
manage it.
finger on his hands. Yeah. And about how I learned that he's just fine.
Wow.
It was actually a funny piece, and it was a good piece, and it was one that I performed in a live show called Listen to Your Mother. I had about 700 people at it. It was on YouTube. I mean, I was just one of many people. So
That's so cool.
Yes, it was really cool. My friend was like, Sam, that was such a great piece, and you did I loved that you kept going, and he looked at me and he was like, you wrote about that? And I'm thinking, oh, not only did I write about it, I performed it, the whole thing. And that was like the end. That was the end for me of writing about parenting. It's not that I normally wrote about the kids. That was actually a little more unusual. But when you have 4 kids and you're writing about parenting, they make their way in sometimes.
Yeah.
And he was 10. The other ones were, all 2 to 3 years younger. And I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And around that same time, 2 women I knew were starting a website called the Her Stories Project that was mostly focused on friendship. And they wanted an advice columnist. I'd written other things about friendship here and there for different websites. And I'd helped them both like start, or well, at least one of them get her blog started, and gave her a lot of advice. And she had seen some of my other advice stuff. And she's like, we need an advice columnist. Do you want to do that? And I was like, well, I'm not a therapist. I kind of felt funny about it. I'm like, that feels a little, I don't want to be like a poser. Mm-hmm. And she was like, no, we'll make that the point. You're just a person who's obsessed with friendship. And I was. This was 2014. Remember, it was 2009 or 10 or so when I'd written that book about friendship. I mean, I'd
full
really
circle.
been focused on friendship for a long time, and did that for about 4 years. And then they decided to shift their website to other stuff and allowed me to keep my content, which was very kind. And I put it all on my site. And then a few years later, podcasting was where it's at. You know that? You know that as well as anyone. So I was like, that seems to be the next thing. It was COVID times. And so in 2020, I started thinking about a podcast like everyone else. And in 2021, I actually started it. So we're coming up on 4 years, but I've been writing about friendship for over a decade and podcasting about it for 4 years.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I know I made you talk a lot, but you really set the tone for what you're doing right now. And it's called Dear Nina, right? And
yes,
is it the same just for listeners who can share with our listeners? Of course, I'll put the podcast in the show notes, but is it the same as your advice column where you touch on topics, right? I'm guessing Dear Nina comes from that.
From the letters, yeah. It's called Dear Nina, Conversations About Friendship is the whole name. For anyone thinking about a podcast, that's a very long name, and I don't suggest having such a long name, but at this point, I'm not changing it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is, because I wanted the word friendship in there, and I wanted the Dear Nina concept.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's just like a mouthful. It started out exactly as you just said, where I would have a letter, because I still get, I use them in my Substack newsletter. Once a month, I'll do one of the anonymous letters. I get a lot of anonymous letters. And because the form I use, which was all the way back from when I was on Her Stories, doesn't require an email address. It means sometimes you get some spam. I don't get a lot. It's worth it, though, because people really will write to you. If they have to put their email address in, or they have to go through the trouble of making up an email address, it stops people. But knowing that they don't need to. So
very cool.
I get some really good stuff. And the fact that I could still be writing and talking about friendship after all these years, there's just so many very little bits of friendship. A lot of it falls into 3 different buckets. There's making friends, keeping friends, losing friends. The biggest bucket is keeping. That's actually the really nuanced stuff that it takes to keep friends. And the making and the losing is a little bit more same. But I moved it pretty quickly from the letters and used them instead in the newsletter, because I realized I wanted to have more conversations. Hence the name. So I have a lot of guests. But I have found over time, and it's like maybe advice for you too, as a podcaster, that people really come for the topic, not so much the person. So when I have somebody really well known, or I have my mom, or I have my best friend from home, her name's Taryn, I've had her on a bunch, or I have a solo, which I now do about once a month, the traffic's about the same. So I think that's really interesting to note.
That is really interesting.
People come, and not saying they're coming for me, they come for the topic. So I work really hard on the titles, because that's what gets people.
I'm going to really take that to heart.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you some friendship questions.
Oh, yay. Fun.
Yeah. And I'm in a interesting, just a little background on me. I moved a lot on purpose, like college, grad school, I liked experiencing different places, but I'm not a very emotional person unless you've been in my life for years and years and you're literally like family to me, meaning I'm a lot more pragmatic and, that kind of person. And so with friendships, I have a hard time maintaining long distance friendships. And the people that I do maintain, they kind of have the same personality with me, where it's like, I don't need to talk to you for 6 months, and then we talk after 6 months and it's like nothing changed, or they're good at texting, right? And so I'm going to ask you advice on that in a minute. But first I want to talk about adult friendships. It's really hard. And why is it so hard?
We're spread so thin. Like having those phones is a blessing and a curse. So it makes us connected with so many people, and we can only really
Right.
deeply be in touch with so many people.
Right.
I really think that's a big part of it.
Interesting.
That it makes you feel like you have scratched the itch of connection, but you really haven't. And so then we get a little bit lazy about the work it really takes to
Interesting.
keep up a friendship, because the texting and the sending of memes, all of that is great in the middle of keeping in touch, but it's not how we develop the real connection to begin with. And I think we've forgotten that.
Interesting.
It's the middle, that's the middle part, but it's not the building blocks. And being together in person really does matter. And there's this whole like trend I see on social media, TikTok and Instagram, and I'm on there a lot, and people often will get on there. And I'm on an algorithm of friendship, right? Because that's the stuff I'm interested in. That's what it shows me. So you could get on Instagram and not see any of this, but I see it. And it will be like, I'm just a low maintenance friend. It's a little bit what you're describing. You can talk to me once a year and that's fine. And there is something nice about having that attitude, in that you are not expecting too much, but it also is the easy road. And it may not add up to the depth that you're hoping to have in your life, like when you're in your 40s or your 50s. Because it's like a short-term thing that's nice, but for the long term, that is not going to be the kind of friendship of a person who really shows up. It may feel that way now because you may be remembering a time when you were closer. It wasn't as long ago. But as time marches forward, if you've only seen a person every 3 years, or really had a phone chat and done more than text, it's very hard to sustain that.
Yeah. I love the honesty.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I don't like low maintenance friendships.
Yeah.
I know that makes me kind of uncool. I actually think you have to put a little more work in than that.
Yeah. Why do you think it's harder for adults to make friends than for children or teenagers? I feel like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's this sort of this wall that comes up when you're an adult because you're aware of so much more, where it's like, I want to come across a certain way. I don't want him to perceive me. Is that something that plays a role, or is it something else?
Oh, I think so. But to answer the first part of your question, why it was easier when we were young, friendship takes two things. Well, I would say three really important factors. Proximity. So really being in close proximity. We have that when we're kids. Like you go to school every single day, or college or camp, or these, if you have an after school activity, if you're a dancer, or you are in a swim club or something. Proximity, meaning you are truly physically in close proximity, and time. So there's studies that it takes about 200 hours to really develop a close friendship.
Wow.
And that, again, when you're like living in a dorm, or you're living even in a neighborhood, right? That adds up. Yeah. Nothing adds up in no time. Coworkers even. So you're saying you work remote. So like think about, even as an adult, people become friends with people at work because of proximity and time, because they are really building those hours really fast. The third thing is a little harder for people to accept, and that's chemistry. And sometimes we have good chemistry with people, or we don't. And there isn't always, almost like dating too, there isn't always a good reason. Like when you're dating, you may, on paper, it may seem like you should really get along well, but for whatever, there's something, you get together and it's just not there. That is same for friends. Where it gets really tricky is some people can't get over the fact that not every friendship needs to be like amazing chemistry. That's where it's different than dating.
Right.
You don't need a magical spark every time you make a friend. Right. Sometimes decent enough chemistry, like you're not offended by the person and you do make sense on paper. Once you add proximity and time, that could develop into a friendship, but some people are stopped by the proximity.
Wow.
And then the opposite happens, where you have this amazing chemistry, but you don't have proximity. Right. And now you are like chasing this friendship that is actually really hard to develop because you live far away.
So, okay, that's my situation now with one of my friends. Love her to pieces. Not going to name her, but we have amazing chemistry and we were really, really close. And then I moved after grad school and proximity thing. Chemistry is great. The proximity is not there. And she likes phone calls and I like text. And so we also don't have that going for us. And we are struggling a little bit to kind of maintain that friendship. And it's really sad because we do really love each other. So do you have advice for that?
I have a perfect solution for you two in particular.
Okay.
It's going to be a marriage of text and phone calls, and you
Okay.
have to start doing voice memos. That's your solution. I actually use voice memos with a couple long distance friends. It's the perfect balance. Do you ever use voice memos?
Sometimes.
Do you use WhatsApp at all?
Only WhatsApp.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic! Because voice memos on regular text are kind of a hassle.
I'm a big WhatsApp girl.
Me too. Okay, so WhatsApp, and if your friend has to be on WhatsApp too, though,
Yes, she
because
does.
okay, but this is advice for other people. It's very hard to get someone to adapt another app. You
Yes,
kind of have
yes.
to deal with the app that you both are comfortable in. Yeah, so I wouldn't say to someone, "Oh, you should get WhatsApp." No, they're not going to get WhatsApp.
Only
just
if you have it
for
Okay.
you. But yes, if you otherwise, then you can do this on text. It's just not as slick.
Or Instagram. Instagram has voice notes as
Yeah,
well.
that's true. That's true. So if you're both big on that, that works as well. I like voice notes so much because you can do it on your own time. That's why people like text as opposed to a phone call.
Yes, that's me. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So you can be doing, I respect that. I like text too. You can be on a walk and leave a voice memo, and then your friend can hear it 2 hours later on a commute or something and choose to text you back or voice memo you back. You're saying she likes calls. This is sort of an in between of a text and a call.
Interesting.
I do think you should honor the phone call thing sometimes.
Okay. It's just so like, I've never been a phone call person ever.
Yeah.
But I understand that you have to kind of find that compromise if you're really serious about maintaining the relationship, right? It also comes down to that. It's like, how badly do you want to maintain the relationship?
Yes, I really think voice memos can be your solution.
I'm going to try it.
I did do an episode once, just a solo, like I'll do like once a month, like a 10-minute. People like these; they're easy to digest.
Yeah.
And it was called something along the lines of, "Yes, you need to see your long distance friends," and not all the time. I'm not saying a yearly trip. Actually, my assistant producer does do a yearly trip with her friends, and I'm like, and she has
That's
three
really cool.
kids. I think that's amazing, and I have a friend here who does that with her long distance friends, and I'm always really impressed with that. It's hard, and it takes one of the people in the group, or if it's a pair, one of the people has to be a really good planner.
Right.
Somebody has to be willing to take that on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be as intense as that. But even if you saw her just like one time in the 2025, 2026, year, just the planning of it usually keeps you in better touch. Right. And even if the trip is only 2 days, even if it's just one
it's
night.
like you're bonding over the plans and you're bonding, the logistics. Yeah.
It's like the journey, not the destination. And usually those trips, I will say the trips themselves are just okay. I'm not a great traveler. I like my own bed. But it's always worth it because the planning of it is what keeps
and
you
the
in
anticipation
touch.
and all that. Yeah, I totally get that. I'm just curious, like from all your years of doing this, is there like a one question or theme that keeps coming up in terms of friendship?
Yes. That's a great way to ask it. It's exactly comes up all the time. It doesn't matter whether it's the written form or people on my Facebook group. I have like a Facebook group where people write anonymous things. It's called Dear Nina, the group on Facebook. And the theme that comes up again and again is I make this kind of effort and my friend doesn't make the same effort. Therefore, we're not really close friends, or we're not the friends I want to be. It's written in all different kinds of way.
Yeah.
But that's the theme is I do this and I expect that my friend does that and they don't. And therefore the friendship is an issue. And I usually try to help people see that their friendship may not be an issue. Your expectation of how other people should do friendship might be the issue. We don't all do friendship the same way. We don't. Like you just said it. You like to text and your friend likes to call. There's no right or wrong. It's just you each
different
perform. I call it perform. Like you each perform friendship differently. Doesn't make you right or wrong. It might make you a mismatch. It might not if you can find some sort of middle ground. But it might be a mismatch. And this doesn't have to be so personal. It doesn't have to be everybody thinks they're like a horrible person. I do think my mission is to help people keep their friends and have an easier time with friendship. And one of the biggest ways I do that is by helping people see that they can learn to appreciate their friends' efforts in other ways.
Right.
If your friend is a fantastic listener, if that friend always likes lending you stuff, let that in. Maybe that friend isn't going to be the one who always reaches out for plans. But
it's like different love languages.
Yes,
almost.
but people don't take it in. And I always want to be like, why doesn't that count? Why can't your friend being a wonderful listener who asks really good follow-up questions count for as much as being the one who always decides that you're going to take a trip together?
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because I think as we talk a lot about this in terms of romantic relationships, and we don't talk a lot about this in terms of friendships. And so much of what we experience in romantic relationships applies to friendships as well. It's basically a partnership, right? And in some sense, and it's the same thing as when your partner's love language is doing things for you, and yours is, talking. And it's like, how do you figure that out? Same thing with friends. And this really applies to my situation as well, because I am the friend, like, you're going through a crisis, call me, I got you. But I'm not the friend that's gonna be like, so what did you do today?
Every so often, you might need to remind them that you really care about them, because just knowing that most people do measure friendship that way, even though I
Yeah.
don't think they should, they do. They
Right.
do look at, they do a certain kind of thing and they expect people to do the same thing. And so every so often, if you just know that in your heart, an occasional, I really missed you and I'm thinking about you
Yeah.
text goes a long way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, one last question about friendship. There are certain times when you need to end friendships, right?
Mm-hmm.
For various different reasons. Can you give listeners who are in this position advice on how to do this in a way where you're not, no bad blood? Like, how do you do this in a respectful, kind way, and just like, this is not right for me in my life anymore? Like, no toxicity, no hard feelings, just like an adult goodbye kind of thing.
Very hard. This is one of the hardest topics to discuss. And there's what's ideal and, maybe proper, and what's realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Ideal and proper would be to be with somebody in person. And
Hard.
yep. And I don't necessarily recommend it, because I think that is what is advised in some places. And, a therapist might tell you that's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, there's the right thing to do technically, because I will say right here, I do not believe in ghosting. I do not think you should
Okay.
ghost. I think that's really cruel. The other extreme would be to sit someone down and be like, this is why the friendship doesn't work for me. And you can try to make I statements and be careful about not being
Right.
like you, and I feel this way and I need space. And
Yeah.
it's kinder than ghosting, but it's still really hard to take that. I think the best thing to do is to pivot the relationship and not necessarily end it.
Mm.
Unless it's okay, if we're talking about a situation where somebody has been very cruel to you, that's easier
Right.
then, though,
Yes.
because now it's
Right.
not such an issue. Now, yes, you can even write an email and say
Right.
like what
Right.
you need to say and be done. It's more like what most of us find ourselves in is this friendship is draining to us in some way. When we leave the person, we just feel like
Right.
drained. We don't feel like so filled up with positivity.
Yeah.
We don't look forward to the time together. Like you see it in your calendar and you're like, ugh, I'm going on a walk with so and so. It's just a bad feeling.
Yeah.
Those are the relationships you need to pivot. If you don't feel good when you're with this person, the most obvious thing to do is see that person less. If you don't feel good when you're texting with that person, the most obvious thing to do is text less.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the first step, is to minimize the contact. And you have to accept when you do that, that the person's going to be maybe a little miffed and disappointed.
Yeah.
You just have to live with that, I think. If
Mm.
you don't want to have the sit down, which there's good reasons to not have the sit down, maybe if this is someone you used to see a lot, can you live with seeing this person in person a couple times a year and just sort of texting in between? Some people might say, oh, that's a little bit fake. I don't know. Is that fake, or is that being a grown up and being kind and not
Right.
burning a bridge and accepting that you may feel this way now, but you may not feel that way in the future and you might not want to burn a bridge.
Right.
So there's like a whole universe of friendship that exists between being really close and completely cutting somebody off. Sometimes cutting
Right.
somebody off actually adds more drama to your life, because you know people in common, and now
Right.
you're going to see them somewhere, and now every time you go to this thing you like have a pit in your stomach, and you've actually created a new problem. You haven't really solved your problem, you've just moved the problem. I think it's more of a solving of the problem to see the person a lot less, communicate a lot less. And if the person gives you a harder time about it, then you need to say, I just don't have as much time to talk as we used to. I think it's okay to say that.
Right. I like that. It's all about giving yourself the permission to kind of take care of yourself. And it's such a spectrum. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about the different kinds of friendships. There's the like talking every single day and being like the chemistry part that you're talking about. And then there's the friends that you care about. And if you need to check in on them, you will. But you don't need to have that closeness like you once did. And I think as adults, we need to hear from people that it's okay for things to change and for relationships to pivot and to look different. I think we're just not taught that at all.
Yeah, it's very normal. I mean, they say about every 7 years, your closest friends change. Like, and that kind of makes sense. And it probably, if you think about your own life, it probably tracks. Like, doesn't mean that those people aren't in your life anymore, but the people you talk to the
Yeah.
most often, text the most often, every 7 years, it shifts a little bit.
100%. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Nina. I'm going to suggest to everyone listening that if you have more friendship questions or interests, go check out Dear Nina. Before we end off, I want to pivot back to Judaism and talk about what that looks like for you today.
So I ended up Well, with my husband together, part of why we liked each other when we met senior year, when I got back from Santiago, is he also was on his own like Jewish journey path. So I came back much more knowledgeable, much more interested in being more into my Judaism. And it helped that a lot of my college friends were people who grew up conservative. Maybe today that would look almost like modern Orthodox, but back in the 90s, that was still conservative Judaism. It doesn't really exist anymore. I don't think there is. It maybe in New York it does, but there is out in the rest of the country, there isn't such a robust conservative life where people like really do Shabbat but it's egalitarian, but they really do it. I mean, that's like really niche.
I agree with you.
That doesn't really exist. But my husband grew up conservative-ish, but it's like they didn't keep kosher or Shabbat or anything like that. But they had Shabbat dinners and stuff growing up. Like I don't think I had a single Shabbat dinner growing up. When I got to college, all my friends were like, okay, we go to Hillel, we have Shabbat dinner, we bang on the table for birkat. I was like, what is this? I'd never seen a thing like it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I was like ashamed that I didn't know this stuff and a little angry about it. So eventually, that's where it came from. That's where my like anger came from, that I felt like I'd wasted my time. It's like, don't bring me to Hebrew school twice a week for 13 years to waste my time. I should have basic Jewish literacy, just basic.
Yeah.
And kind of to say to your thing about the bat mitzvah, I know you probably from your upbringing have a little bit of, I imagine, you could tell me if I'm wrong, like some feelings about, girls not having bat mitzvahs and this and that. The way I grew up, I'm sure I get it. The way I grew up, we all had them. Boys and girls. We learned them on a tape, and I don't know that it meant that much to anybody. No, people didn't leave and like continue to read Torah after. Right. And my big thing, I've written a whole series of articles of this for the Jewish Daily Forward and other places back in the day, back when I was doing my freelance writing, as we were trying to figure out what to do for our own kids. I didn't want to just do a bar mitzvah factory bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. I wanted the kids to really, learn a lot. And I felt strongly, many people disagreed with me. I heard from a lot of people that reading the Torah is just one mitzvah you could demonstrate to show you are now an adult in the Jewish community. Why are we not pushing people, girls or boys, go visit the sick? When you become a Jewish adult, it is now your responsibility to go visit the sick. Why is everything about learning trope? And we've overemphasized in the American Jewish system, like a robot, must come read Torah, must learn trope. This is your bar mitzvah. That's like an American Jewish.
Wow.
There are other ways you can demonstrate, like, I am now of age. I can now do these things. That's why boys, a lot of times when they turn 13 on their Hebrew birthday, the first thing they do is like wrap tefillin. Yeah. Like it doesn't have to be coming up to the Torah. It's in some communities, that's all they do. You are a bar mitzvah when you turn 13 or a girl when you turn 12, and you don't actually have to do all of that stuff. But anyway, I really feel strongly about that. Most people disagree. They love the factory. This is how we do it. They love that. I let my kids, with my husband, each kid did it differently. So I just have to tell you this because I think you'll find it interesting. My oldest did a Thursday morning at the conservative synagogue where we were more involved at the time because he went to non-denominational Jewish day school. There isn't one here that's like a conservative one. There is an Orthodox one, but that wasn't quite where we were. So he went to that. So he had some Hebrew. He didn't do Hebrew school. You don't get a Saturday morning at like the big suburban synagogue unless you go through their program. So we took a Thursday morning and then we did the Saturday morning at Chabad. But the one we invited the people to was the Thursday morning because Chabad was like in a little warehouse at the time. My oldest daughter, under him, she did her whole thing through Chabad. So no, she did not read from the Torah. She studied with the Rebbitzin for a year, learned a ton of things, learned to daven, learned the prayers, learned about her parsha, and gave the Devar Torah at the service at Chabad on a Saturday morning. My next daughter wanted to do the whole enchilada at the conservative synagogue. So that's what she did. She won't even really go there anymore. She loves Chabad. She now studies with the same Rebbitzin that studied with my older daughter, and my girls just go once a month to Chabad. My youngest son, who's 13, just had his bar mitzvah this year. Wow. He did the whole thing at Chabad, which we now have a brand new building, which my husband and I were very involved in, and he didn't do the conservative thing at all. I used to consider us Reformadox. That's what I called us for a long time. I've moved away from that. I call us like modern Orthodox light. Or you know what? We're like Chabad. We're Chabad. We're like a Chabad family.
There's like the Chabad light now. Have you heard of that?
No, but that would probably describe us.
Okay.
And my son, my oldest, is completely Shomer Shabbos. He did a gap year at a Chabad yeshiva in Jerusalem. He's back there. There's some there. But he goes to regular secular college. He's going to be a business guy.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. I love that this is such an important I'm not a mom, but this is such an important thing, and not just with Judaism, but like allowing your children to all kind of do their own thing. And I'm so grateful I had parents like that.
Yeah, I really tried. You know, people gave me, Faye, a very hard time that my daughter didn't do like what they call a real bat mitzvah, where she read from the Torah and all that. And I struggled with the criticism because it would come oftentimes from people who really did not have a robust Jewish life at all. If you're somebody who does very little Jewishly, but you're going to like talk to me who has a very robust Jewish life and tell me that my daughter's bat mitzvah is not quote unquote real because she didn't do the factory. I really found that very offensive. But I did it anyway, kind of like quitting to be not going to law school. I still would go forward with the thing I wanted to do, but it doesn't mean it was hard for me. And there was a certain relief I had in my next daughter doing it quote unquote the regular way, because it was kind of refreshing to not have to like explain to people what we were doing. I was like, okay, I'm glad that one.
Yeah.
Just so I could show people. It's not like I don't think girls can, but I also don't think girls or boys have to have it be real.
And this is such a beautiful way for us to end, because I think it's very natural to, people pleasing is a real thing. It's natural to not want conflict and not to do things differently. But at the end of the day, it's really what happens next. Like, do you do it anyway? Right. And so this is how I end off my podcast, is asking all my guests what being a trailblazer means to them. And I think you kind of just answered it, but I'm going to let you put it in your own words.
Really, you answered it. I love how you said that, is knowing that it's hard to disappoint people. I mean, sort of in my own words, or know that you're going to have to explain yourself, but doing it anyway, doing what feels true to you and also new, and pushing yourself.
Yeah. Nina, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.